Good morning, good afternoon, and wherever you're joining us from today. Welcome. We are minutes away from going live, and if you can hear me and see that everyone is getting onboarded. A quick note while we all wait. So we have done a pre-webinar survey, and we have collected all the questions, and we're going to run through conversations that you are going to about to hear and shape you what you have told us. So welcome everyone. I'm Amandeep Singh, Principal Analyst and Enterprise Transformation Advisor at QKS Group. Today, I have the privilege of moderating what I genuinely believe is one of the most important conversations happening in enterprise technology right now. So consider this time of minutes that are running AI in production today. Yet fewer than we have seen that 21% have actually redesigned their workflows to include governance. And I think while talking on this webinar, we all agree to this point that the AI innovation is it's not a technology problem, it's a structural gap, and it has a deadline. So we all know that recently in August 2nd, 2026, the EU AI Act becomes fully enforceable, and that is not months away, and that is just weeks. So that's why we have brought this title of today's session, the emerging AI trust layer, closing the gap between AI scale and verifiable trust. Today I want to unpack this phrase because I think this is very precise. Like as AI has scaled, like I think the way AI has scaled, it's faster than anyone has predicted. But trust, verifiable and auditable, defensible trust has not keep up the pace of the way AI has grown, and that is the gap we all are here to close. So let me introduce our panelists today. First, Jim Rosenberger, president and co-founder of Verephied, who brings the business and market vision for why this category exists and why it matters now. Jim, a very warm welcome to this panel today.
Thank you, Amandeep. Delighted to be here. I want to say, I guess, one thing clearly up front, because I think it shapes everything else we're going to talk about today, is that Verephied is not a governance tool. It's not a policy layer. It's a computational trust architecture. It computes authenticity, authority, and permissibility at every action attempt in real time and at scale. Here's what that means. The system does not check trust after the fact. It produces it, evidence and all, at the moment of every action. We built it because every existing category, IAM, MLOps, GRC, they describe what should happen, but none of them compute whether it's actually happening at the moment it happens. The one distinction is the whole premise of what we'll cover today.
That's really great. A very warm welcome to you, Jim. And I'm really excited to go get into these insights. And next we have Randy Feldman, architect, inventor, and co-founder of Verephied, who brings the technical depth to the show today. And what is actually verifiable trust look like into the production?
So Amandeep and everyone, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Let me just follow up on what Jim said. He has graciously opened the door. Let me walk through and put the stake in the ground. The missing piece is the ability to tell not just what you're doing, but who's trying to do it. Identity is a credential. It's a world line. It's your story or that of any object from the moment it's created and enters the picture until it's done. Authority is not a permission. It's a computed state at the moment of action, just like Jim said. As he noted, trust is not something that we just want to declare. Otherwise, the agents going 1,000 times a minute are going to do what they want. Trust isn't declared, it's computed. And a theory and a discovery and the invention that this came from does that. IAM is like a check at the door. Verephied is a physics solution. And that's the shift that we want to talk about today.
That's great, Randy, and equally excited to get into that. And lastly, we have Devendra Pagnis, our AVP of Data Analytics and AI here at QKS Group, who will ground today's conversation in analyst research and empirical picture of where enterprises actually stand. Devendra.
Hey, Amandeep, thank you very much, and great to be here, especially in the august company of Jim and Randy. I spend most of my working life looking at how enterprise describe their AI ambitions, versus how they actually operate. And the delta between these two things, that delta is really the trust gap, and I think Jim talked about it a little bit. And our research is quite consistent, Amandeep. That's very important. The organizations that close the gap faster share one characteristic. They treat governance as an engineering discipline, not as a documentation exercise. And that's where the difference lies.
Perfect. So, to everyone, a very warm welcome to all and to our panelists. And here is how we have structured the next 60 minutes for you. So, we will move through six thematic areas. The areas are the AI trust gap, the identity problem, provenance and lineage, life cycle governance, and regulatory convergence, and the emergence of what we are calling the universal trust layer as a market category. So we'll close the session with open Q&A. Questions can already move into the chat. Please keep them coming, and we'll address the best one lives, right? So let's start, with core diagnosis. So Devendra, you just mentioned about the cadence of the research that brings these things together. Our research shows that most enterprises are governed by liability and not by design. Can you please unpack that for us? What does that actually look like inside an organization?
Hey, thanks, Aman. And it's a great question to begin with. We've been talking to a lot of organizations, and let me put it like this. It looks like an AI system is built, it's shipped, it's scaled, and then suddenly one fine morning a regulatory inquiry arrives. Or an incident happens, and suddenly everybody on the floor is scrambling to reconstruct an audit trail that was never designed to exist. That's where the governance was reactive. It was built for that moment of accountability, not for the moment of action that was required. And that is the fundamental flaw. What our research consistently has shown over the last several years is that identity systems, governance frameworks, and compliance tools are three separate layers in most enterprises that we have seen, and they do not communicate at runtime. Your IAM platform knows who's logged in. Your risk framework knows what the policy says. Your compliance tool generates a quarterly report. So all of them are doing their jobs precisely, but none of them know what your AI agent is doing right now, at this moment, or on behalf of the user, under what authorization and with what data. And that's what creates the problem.
Perfect. So just Devendra, because you mentioned this, I would just wanted to highlight the recent survey insight that we got from the same thing is, when actually asked about the primary AI governance challenge, respondents were actually split between audit readiness and identity and access and regulatory compliance. These are like the three symptoms of the same structural disconnect that you were describing. So
Yep.
thank you for clearly showing that why many organizations are not actually failing because they lack governance language, but because governance is disconnected from action. So, Jim, I want to bring in you here because this is exactly where many client conversation begins, and you have been directly talking to these clients. So, what is the most common misconception enterprises bring into their first real governance conversation?
The most common one, that a trust layer is just a governance tool, a better dashboard, a smarter policy engine, one more compliance checklist. That's the model people arrive with. They're looking to buy something that fits in, and I get it. It's the procurement reflex that they have. But that's the exact misconception we have to correct. Verephied is not a governance tool. It's a computational trust layer. It computes authenticity, authority, and permissibility at runtime. Governance describes what should happen. Verephied operates inside that action itself. The moment an agent acts, the system resolves its identity. It verifies the authority it's carrying, decides whether the action proceeds and seals the evidence of all of it in the same instant. The trust isn't checked after the fact, it's constituted at the moment of action. Governance is a document, verified is a runtime computation, and no amount of better documentation closes that gap. I guess the second misconception that I hear is that MLOps captures operational telemetry, GRC policy intent, and here's why composing them fails. You can't stack three tools into a capability that none of them contain. The trust gap exists because none of those were ever designed to compute authenticity, authority, and permissibility at the moment of action. That's the field that Verephied occupies, and we feel that it's actually a new field.
Mhm. That's Jim, I think that's a sharp distinction. Documentation may describe trust, but it does not create trust at the moment an AI system acts, right? So, Randy, from an architecture standpoint, because you come from the inventor background, this raises the obvious next question of where that missing computation actually sits. When can you walk into an enterprise and look at the AI stack? How would you diagnose where the trust gap lives?
Well, thanks, Amandeep. That's a really great question. And the answer is, I'll go in reverse order, what you just said. Where does the layer, or where does it fit in an OSI model? And this is the point. It did not exist. There was no trust layer. This is the new layer that we've been operating on for years. Speed made the difference. You cannot take the time to say, let's wait and make sure you're really you. Let me go check your credentials again. That's not what anyone does. And now it's too fast. Governance today is still all about documentation or recording or tracking or setting a limit. Well, here's the difference. Governance is like the speed limit sign. ARC is the speedometer. We are calculating this when you go to log in. So once you're verified, once you're proven, which takes background check, credentials, etc., we capture that information. Now, every time you try to log in, that information created a token, an image of what your reality is. And we can now measure that and check it every single time. And when you create something, whatever you create gets that same characterization. And then we cryptographically seal it. We make it part of the trust layer. Then you and everyone else can check, are you still you? Is it some agent trying to act like you? Is this object really the one I'm sending downstream? So this is this is a new paradigm shift in being able to compute that. And it was born out of the physical supply chain, and now it's we have the reality that AI changed the game exponentially, and we can no longer operate under that assumption. So once you see this gap, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. Randy, I think that gives an audience a very practical test. Like if the authority and provenance cannot be computed at action time, the trust gap is already present, right? So that's a great insight. Devendra, let's connect the architectural gap to the enterprise cost and business risk. So when we talk about architectural gap in AI governance, many enterprise see this as a technical issue. But where does the actual cost come from when these gaps are left unaddressed?
Hey, Amandeep, this is something which has been very commonly talked about. It's a very common forum question, and I will put it this way: the cost actually comes in three forms. The first, there is obviously the regulatory cost, and I think you talked about a date August 2nd, which is very, very important, right? So the EU AI Act, which is going to kick in, maximum penalties are 35 million euros. Let me repeat that: 35 million euros or 7% of global annual revenues, whichever is greater. So you can imagine what the CFOs and the CEOs are thinking about this, right? So these are not theoretical numbers. These are real numbers kicking in from 2nd of August. The second one, there is the reputational cost, where your AI system produces an outcome that you cannot explain or you cannot defend, and that is increasingly not just a CEO level, but even a board level event. And then the third one, which is also equally important, is the remediation cost, which is almost always higher than when you are retrofitting governance, than what your engineer is doing it right from the start. The enterprises closing these gaps are doing it proactively today, and that is, they are doing it at an architecture level. And I think that, Aman, uh, is the answer for in terms of how we are going to minimize the cost.
Yeah. And I think thank you for that, Devendra. These insights on the three forms of the cost is very clear in business terms. But I think the cost is not only regulatory but reputation and operational as well, like you mentioned. So the next layer of this problem, obviously, it's identity, because without knowing who or what acted, every other governance questions becomes harder, right? So let's jump to Randy, and like Randy, most of the enterprises believes that because they have identity and access management, SSO, MFA, or directory services, they have solved the identity problem for AI. Why they are wrong? What is your take on that?
Well, they're wrong at the level that when you get that identity verified, what happens the next time you come in? It doesn't check all that. It assumes that because you've given that login credential, or you've said yes to that two-factor authentication, that that's still you. How many billions of dollars are we seeing lost because that door is being broken in and adulterated by agents? So that's really the question: is, okay, what happens when this is an agentic session? Agents don't have those credentials. They don't have what we're calling the world line. And this is a subtle difference. I'll inject it here again, is when you do that background check, and JP Morgan spends minutes or days making sure you're legit to open an account, we now take that information and compute your authenticity, your golden record. Now, next time you come in, we check it again every single time, and anything that you create. So agents don't have these sessions. They don't have the world lines. And if they borrow your credentials, how do we know that it's legitimate? The thing is this: a human logs in once. An agent, multi-agent action happens thousands of times a minute. And that completely crushes IAM, zero knowledge proofs. Every one of those things are spot checks. They're the guy at the door who's just saying, "Are you you?" He doesn't know whether you've got a counterfeit driver's license there. ARC can tell that.
Randy, I think that's a critical point, and I will also want to highlight some insight from the survey, the pre-session survey that we had. Like identity and access management are ranked as second most common governance challenge. So I completely agree with the point. That AI agents do not behave like human users, so treating them like human sessions creates a false sense of actual control. So let me pull Jim here, like from a business risk perspective. I wanted to understand, Jim, what happens when enterprise allow agents to operate through borrowed or shared credentials?
The risk,
Mhm.
you've created accountability opacity at scale. An AI agent takes an action, modifies a record, executes a transaction, sends a communication, and traces back to a shared service account. Now, you can't establish any of that. Which agent did it, under whose authorization, for what purpose, against which policy? You have none of that. In a regulated industry, that's not governance failure, that's control failure. And regulators see control failure as a fundamental breakdown. And the risk scales with your AI ambitions. 10 agents today, that's manageable, barely. But 1,000 agents by year end, which is what a lot of enterprises are targeting. Now you've got thousands of points uncontrolled, unverifiable, that's when uncomfortable questions start from regulators and from auditors.
Yeah, I think, Jim, I think that really brings out the accountability issue because the organization may see an action, but not a defensible chain of responsibility behind it. So let me again pull Randy in. And Randy, can you walk us through what a proper non-human identity framework looks like? What must it deliver?
Sure, thank you. It's relying on the discovery of the fact that everything has an identity and a world line that exists from beginning to end. Every agent needs a cryptographically bound identity, not some shared account. In other words, that agent has to be identified and authenticated when it's created. Now, if that's legitimate and it's my agent that I gave the access to, it's connected to my world line, which was validated. This is a good agent. Now, with the trust layer, I can check that agent every time it tries to act. Identity, authority, permissibility, all computed at the same time. And you couldn't do this years ago, but the technology exists now in the digital world. This is computable. So authenticity of you and your intent has to be done at every action. Authenticity first by verified, and then governance rules can kick in. And this is the test that we've seen. You can borrow credentials, and that's like letting the car drive itself with someone else's driver's license. It's not even verified. And you can't allow the malicious actor or agent in to begin with because it can pass governance. Sure, that looks okay and it hasn't exceeded a limit, but you don't see the Trojan horse. ARC is doing a measurement, an authentication, the verified solution at the point it tries to come in and act, and it will stop you before you even get to introduce it in.
Perfect. I think that's great, Randy. I think this actually moves the discussion from abstract identity to specifically architectural controls. So I would want to pull Devendra in, and based on what you have seen in the market, how mature are the enterprises today against that kind of framework?
So, Aman, I would keep it short to say, most enterprises that we have seen are at an ad hoc or a developing stage. That's kind of the short answer. But kind of let me double click a little bit on this is, most of these enterprises, they have some identity control inherited from their cloud platforms. It could be GCP, AWS, Azure. Now, the situation is here is all of these service accounts concepts, they were not designed with the delegation chain or with the runtime policy evaluation or even the audit receipt generation. That is typically what an agentic enterprise actually needs. However, the good news is that Amandeep is that this is the highest leverage intervention point that we can have. So short messages, get the identity layer right, and then every other governance capability will become more tractable, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that is really great. I think that this shows why identity is such a high leveraging starting point because I think once it's fixed, the rest of the governance becomes more manageable. And with this, we have covered our three themes, guys, and so we are moving up to the fourth theme of provenance lineage, right? So I would want Randy to come in and can you help us understand like if you cannot trace an AI decision back to its data, its model, and its authorization chain, can you really say you govern it? What would be ideal way to say it?
No, you really can't. And obviously, this is what the EU Act and all the action in the United States is driving for. There's a level of auditability. You have to be able to say, pull back the covers and say, why was this permitted or why was it not permitted? And continuously learn. Look, provenance is not a simple subject, but in the context of what we're doing, provenance isn't a log. It's the cryptographically sealed value of your life cycle. You can't modify it. It's not a document. Okay. It's the collective truth of your authentication at any point in time. You've established provenance when you proved you were you, your driver's license, your passport. Next time you come in, if it's still you, if the calculations hold and your action is valid, you have provenance emerges. It's your history. And we need to capture that in an encrypted immutable token. And over the life cycle, think about how this gets stronger and harder for the system to be compromised. Trust is sealed at the moment of action, not reconstructed later, but it's auditable. We can go back and say, why did this fail? And that's the difference between a photograph and a sketch you draw afterwards.
Yeah, I think Randy, that distinction between logging and provenance is very important because I think one is the record about the action and other is the evidence bound to that action itself, right? So coming to Jim, the EU AI Act makes data provenance a legal obligation from August 2nd, but for enterprises that are starting this journey now, is that a recoverable position? What is your take, Jim, on this?
It's recoverable, but it takes urgency and the right architecture sequencing. Here's the challenge with retrofitting provenance. You're backfilling lineage for systems that were never really designed to capture it. That's technically possible. We do it, but it takes longer and it costs more than building it from the start. A quick note, the EUI did finalize a deferral a few days ago. And they're moving it back to December 2027. So it's a runway, but not a reprieve. The organizations who will be sitting comfortable when it lands, they're the ones who started this work 18 months ago. For everyone else, the answer is pretty straightforward. Move fast, prioritize your highest risk AI systems first, and then use a trust layer that wraps your existing infrastructure without a full rebuild.
Mhm. Yeah, Jim, I think that makes the sequencing very clear because organizations can recover, but the longer they wait, I think the more expensive and less clean the evidence picture becomes, right? So, Devendra, can you help us connect province to the broader current cloud native governance stack debate? Like, why are current cloud native governance tools, incomplete for this requirement that you have been in the market for so long? What is your take on that?
So, Amandeep, these governance tools are incomplete, to the primary reason is because they were never, they were designed for another different problem, right? You are trying to look at them for a different solution. So, look at cloud native observability tools, looking at logging frameworks, monitoring platforms, or even ML ops dashboards. They're excellent at capturing operational telemetry. They will tell you exactly, your model served a prediction at this time with this latency, so you get the exact details. But what they were not designed, what they will not tell you is whether that prediction was authorized, whether the data it used was properly governed, whether the model version was the approved one or whether there was an unapproved one in production, or whether the decision can be reproduced and explained to a regulator if an audit query comes in. And I think, Amandeep, that gap is what the structural gap is. So operational telemetry and governance evidence are different artifacts for different audiences and serving different purposes. Mixing them up in one of the most common is a big mistake in my opinion. And organizations assume their logging infrastructure is their governance infrastructure. I think that again is a big gap. ARC's audit receipts are cryptographically sealed at action time, making them tamper evident and regulator defensible. So that, in my opinion, is where kind of the gap lies, and that's where you see most of these governance tools as incomplete, Amandeep, in my opinion.
So Randy, do you want to add something on the tamper evidence? I've seen a lot of things coming from you, on social media, and I would want to hear about, the technical requirement of the tamper evidence.
Sure. So tamper evidence in the digital world, this is really the dividing line between governance and just documentation. we have to take that measurement of trust, that calculation, and once it's established and you have provenance, we have to capture that and seal it cryptographically in what we call the immutable token, or a cryptographic set of information, so that you can't modify it. And tamper evident means just that. If you can change the evidence, then it's not evidence. It's just a log that you've modified. So the trust layer treats that as something you have to seal cryptographically, tamper evident. Like the seal on a bottle of pills, if that has been opened, if that's not sealed, you can't trust it. And ARC in the digital world can manifest that with the, the cryptographic, the encryption. And in the future, we're not worried about the quantum. We'll use post-quantum cryptography. We'll use what's coming. But you have to start by realizing the process has to change, the layer has to exist, and we've got to claw back, what's been let go so long, because AI has just exponentially jumped us to the future.
Perfect, Andy. I think that closes the loop on the provenance, and that makes it really clear that evidence only becomes defensible when it cannot be silently changed after the fact, right? So let us now talk about life cycle governance, because one of the most dangerous assumptions that we have seen in enterprise AI right now is that governance is a pre-deployment checklist. Devendra, why is that framing so problematic? You have been talking to so many users. What do you think about it?
And I agree with you, Amandeep. You use the word dangerous. I like it because I've had a few leaders tell me that this is indeed dangerous. So yeah, and the simple short answer there again is, because these frameworks treat governance as gates, not as a continuous discipline. They consider it as a one-time event. So you have a pre-deployment checklist telling you whether your AI system was compliant at a single point of time, the moment it was shipped. But AI systems drift, and that's kind of the fundamental difference between kind of an IT deployment versus an AI deployment. Data distributions change, model behavior shifts drastically, new use cases come into production that were never anticipated at design time. So a checklist that was kind of prepared a point of time in the past captures none of that. So Amandeep, that's where the gap is. Our research also has shown that most enterprises apply governance only at the time of deployment stage. Controls are built, uh, you know, risk classification comes in, data governance, assessment, you look at identity scope definition, all these are frequently absent. And then after these controls, after deployment, there is continuous monitoring that happens, policy drift detection happens, there's anomaly alerting, and at the other end of the life cycle, as the AI systems become more mature, credential revocation and then compliant archiving at decommissioning are almost entirely absent. So you can almost see, Amandeep, these controls are absent at both stages. The gap is at both ends of the life cycle. It's not just at one end, and that's where to the point that you said is dangerous. Is that's why the framing is problematic, because the gap is both at the beginning of the life cycle as well as at the end of the life cycle.
Yeah. So, Devendra, you just, because you just touched upon the architectural terms, Randy, can you please walk us through the six phases, that you mentioned earlier in our chats? Like, what does governance at every phase actually looks like in architectural terms?
Well, sure. Let me answer that, since you mentioned that. So the phases we're talking about is the life cycle. Trust has to be computed in every phase: design, data, model, deploy, runtime, decommission. So those are the technical phases that many of us know: enterprise solutions, software life cycle, the technology world moves through. Let me give you a real simple example you can keep in your mind. So we build a bridge, and an inspector checks the list and everything is great. Okay. The difference here is ARC, the verified solution, keeps the inspector there every day, every time a car passes, every time you go over the bridge, it's checking. It doesn't wait for the bridge to collapse or say, let me check in 6 months, or let me check periodically and make sure, the records are still authentic. The difference is we can no longer afford to live in a digital world where that first most fundamental thing is not checked throughout its life cycle. And due to the evolution of our technology and science, we can do this. The digital gap can be closed. So you inspect it every day, it carries weight across that bridge. You can't hope that it's going to be okay. And then one day that bridge collapses and it's like, why did it collapse? That governance post fact. Let's look at why did it collapse. Well, the verified solution, we want to remove the most fundamental risk, which is inauthenticity in who you are and what you're trying to do first time, every time.
Perfect. So,
and let me add something practical here for the CDOs and the CIOs in the audience. The six phases here, the last one is typically the decommission phase, and that's the one that is typically the most underestimated. We've worked with organizations that had excellent governance. Phase 1 through phase 5, all of it, and then simply turned the model off and deleted the artifacts. That's a regulatory problem. The immutable audit records have to be preserved under your data retention obligations, even after the model is gone. Governance does not end when the AI does.
yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Randy and Jim, to add on that. Jim, I wanted to ask you this thing, that as the EU AI Act timeline moves closer and enterprise aligned with NIST and AIRMF and ISO 42001, what should CISOs and CDOs prioritize first, and what is the one governance action that cannot, I think, wait anymore and should be a priority for them?
Yeah, well, the EU AI Act, it can't wait. And yes, I'm saying it about a law that was just got a deferral. The deadline moved, the classification did not. If you don't know which of your AI systems qualify as high risk, you don't know which ones carry the full weight of mandatory obligations, or whether that new 2027 December date even applies to you, the classification, these questions, that should have been done months ago. And if it hasn't been, you need to do it now, this week, not this quarter, like now. High risk systems that cover critical infrastructure, hiring, credit, education, law enforcement, things like that, they carry a hard list of obligations. Having technical documentation ready, human oversight in place, data of provenance established, EU AI database registration completed, incident reporting live. These are things that are not operational, they're baseline. So even though they have this deferral, maybe it bought some time to meet them, but it did not eliminate or shrink that list.
Yeah, perfect. I think even if it's delayed, but it's a mandatory to get on the train. Even if the train is late, we need to catch up fast. Yeah. So Jim, I think that makes the priority very clear. And risk classification is not a paperwork exercise. I think it is the starting point for knowing which obligations apply. So I would now want to bring in again Devendra, like for organizations that have been focused on NISTF and RMF, how does that translate? Are they ahead of the curve, or are there still meaningful work to do? What has been your observation in the market, Devendra?
So, Amandeep, NIST RMF, in my opinion, it's a very fantastic methodology. Govern, map, measure, and then manage. It gives you the conceptual, scaffolding for AI risk management. The challenge is that NIST has no legal enforcement mechanism. It's purely voluntary. So organizations, that have built their governance practice around this framework have strong internal frameworks, but may lack the compliance evidence artifacts that, for example, the EU AI Act that we have talked a few times already specifically demands. So these acts, the EU AI Act, for example, is not asking whether you have a good governance philosophy. Probably it assumes you has that. It is asking, specifically whether can you produce readable evidence that your AI system complies with specific technical requirements. So, and that's where some of the organizations are ahead of the curve because, their systems can produce that evidence. The ones who cannot produce that evidence, for them, Amandeep, there is still some meaningful work to be done.
Yeah, I think Devendra, that's a key distinction. A strong framework helps risk management, but I think regulators will still ask for evidence, right?
Yeah.
So Randy, can you help us now get more specific on how regulatory obligation maps to trust layer capabilities? That would be an interesting talk to have from you.
Sure. This is very simple. Let's put it this way. Many industries require different constraints, different regulations. But it turns out that at the bottom, at the end of the story here, although the regulations, the Genius Act, the EU Act, the things that are emerging across the world, they all need the same thing. They need identity, provenance, and policy enforcement. It needs to be auditable. There's one trust layer model that fits all those. And it's multiple frameworks, but one architecture. The solution is the same. When you peel back and you do the analysis, at the end of the day, all their requirements map to the same bottom line solution. It has to start with trust, authenticity, and verifiable. Here's a great example. You can get in a car anywhere around the world, all the millions of different types and manufacturers. The seat belts are all the same. Okay? We only needed one design to make that first fundamental thing safe and controllable. And the answer to the digital world is a unified, universal trust layer that meets the requirements that all of them are asking for fundamentally.
Perfect. Randy, I think that mapping is really useful because it shows that these are not abstract compliance themes and they actually translate directly into technical capabilities. So, Jim, I would want to bring in and I would want to press on the SEC and CFTC implications for financial services organizations audience. Like, how does the US regulatory picture interact with EU AI Act obligations?
It reinforces them, but not the way people expect. Here's the current reality: neither the SEC nor the CFTC has an AI specific rule. The SEC withdrew their proposal. The CFTC advisory is explicitly technology neutral, and that's the trap. No AI rule means no checklist. It means that the existing standards, fiduciary duty, supervision, disclosure accuracy, they apply in full. And when the examiner asks what your AI did and who authorized it, we followed the framework is not an answer.
Mhm.
Evidence is. So the EI mandates the capability, the US regulators presume it. Either way, you land in the same capability set: verifiable identity, traceable lineage, runtime policy controls, and continuous audit evidence. That's the trust layer.
Yeah. Perfect. And Jim, I think that shows the bigger picture. Different regulators may use different language, but the architectural requirement are converging around the same trust capabilities, right? So we have arrived at a category question. So Devendra, like from an analyst perspective, so what makes the universal AI trust layer a distinct market category and not just a feature set from an existing vendors? What do you think?
Hey, Aman, I really appreciate you asking this question, and we've always had a lot of queries coming in from an analyst perspective on this. So first of all, a few things that distinguish a category from a feature, and let me clarify that. First, it solves a problem that no existing category was designed to solve. Identity management platforms traditionally were not built for non-human AI agent. ML ops platforms were not built for regulatory compliance evidence. GRC tools were not built for runtime policy enforcement. So the universal trust layer, why it becomes important, because it addresses the intersection of all of these three at runtime, continuously, in a single architecture layer. That is not a feature of an existing product, Aman, at least in my research, right? This is completely a new category. Second, the category has what we call regulatory inevitability.
Yeah.
And again, let me kind of double click a little bit into the EU AI Act. The EU AI Act creates a compliance requirement that can only be met architecturally. Article 12, you cannot satisfy Article 12's automatic logging requirement with a policy document. Article 14, you can't meet Article 14's human oversight requirement with a training program. These obligations, and I just called out two articles, Aman, there could be several. These obligations demand infrastructure, and that infrastructure, Aman, is the universal trust layer.
Thank you, Devendra, for setting, this category of universal trust layer. I would now, ask Jim, like Jim, if I've asked you to, position verified in this emerging category, how would you position verified in this category?
Um, we believe that Verephied built the trust layer platform. It's the first implementation of computational trust architecture. It's a new field, and it's grounded in a mathematical framework. We call it authenticity field theory. It's a system of operators, invariants, and continuing conditions that lets us compute authenticity, authority, and permissibility as mathematical quantities, not policy declarations. The patent portfolio and the unified theory formalize the mathematics, and the work goes really back 15 years. ARC operationalizes it into a running system platform. This is not an extension of GRC. It's not an enhanced IAM platform. It's a new layer in the AI infrastructure stack. If I use an OSI analogy, the OSA model gave networking a layered architecture. Each layer had one job and a clean interface to the layers above and below it. The trust layer is the AI equivalent, a distinct layer, a necessary layer. It sits between your AI agents and the systems they act on, and it computes trust continuously. You wouldn't try to get security from an application layer alone, and you wouldn't try to get trust from governance documentation alone. The layer has to exist as infrastructure. And the deployment model is really pretty pragmatic. We know most organizations aren't building greenfield. They're running existing AI stacks. So the primary path is going to be to retrofit. We expect that to be the main adoption pattern through 2027. You insert your trust layer above your existing infrastructure, non-human identity plane first, policy enforcement gateway wrapping your current AI endpoints, provenance engine restructuring history from models already in production. And from the day it's in, everything forward is computed and sealed at the moment of action. The backfill covers your past, the layers cover your future. You don't have to rebuild to get governance ready.
Right. And like before we go on to a lot of questions that have been come into the chat, Randy, do you want to leave the technical audience with any last things that you have to say in the mind?
Sure. Thank you, Amandeep. Let me, a lot of what Jim said, I could put some exclamation on it, but let me make a couple quick points here and move on to the questions. There's a reason that the EU backed off. There's a reason that there are runways. There's a reason that they don't want to be they want to be technology neutral. And I've lived through this in other domains, like in the drug industry, enforcing a global pharmaceutical track and trace. There's hesitation about the technology and how we can do this. And let me just say this as a precursor to the publication of some of this works, that one of the reasons this is held off is this is something that is very new. It's a fundamental, it's a genuine, started as an invention, became a discovery, and I'm in the process, together with Jim, publishing the proof that was behind the patents 15 years ago. This does not exist out there. They don't know, and the companies and the experts do not know that you can do what we're talking about. And I can't say it any plainer than that. TCP/IP was invented by the folks at different companies. They created this so the World Wide Web would work. But trust was implied and thought about, and speed was slow. We know things have sped up. So the shift is, we don't need a new dashboard, a new reporting structure. We need a new computational trust layer that you can do. There's nothing else that maps to all the regulations out there. We've looked at it, we've challenged it, and we're continuing to dig, but the proof is coming. And the difference is, I'll say it this way for the technologist or the scientific or the implementers, identity is a world line. It's authority resolved at state. It's a computed field. It's the shape of authenticity. And we can measure that. It's inherent in every object, every entity, every person, place, or thing.
Perfect. That's all the questions that I have now. Let's take some live questions from audience. What have they, what are they asking for? So we have some pretty good questions. So let me take the first question, likely from a CDO. We already have a great data catalog and lineage tool from a major cloud vendor. Why isn't that sufficient for AI provenance? Randy, do you want to take that?
I'm not aware, and looking at the latest advancements, they're all hovering around this solution. But without the ability to compute based on the inherent reality of any object and its world line, you really can't do it. They're hoping they can check it. They're hoping that governance, or they're hoping that initial authentication is going to hold. Back to many things we said, you can't do this. And unless you know the technology to do this at scale and speed, the feeling is governance is the best we can do. We had DevOps, we had DevSecOps. Now they talk about DevGovOps. Well, I'm here to say we need DevTrustOps.
Yeah, that's a great one. So let me take another one, likely from a risk compliance. Our board is asking for AI risk reporting. What does a good AI risk report look like, and how does the trust layer support it? Jim, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Thanks. I think a good AI risk report would really answer three questions for your board. One, which AI systems are operating in our environment, at what risk tier and under what controls. Two, what did those systems do in the last period? And is there any evidence of a policy violation, anomalous behavior, a compliance gap? And thirdly, if a regulator came to us and asked us to produce an evidence package for any AI decision in the last 90 days, could we produce that in under 48 hours? The trust layer makes all three of those questions answerable because the evidence already exists, sealed at the moment of action, not assembled after the fact.
Perfect. That was really great, Jim. I hope that answers the question. And moving on to the next, we have likely from a chief AI officer. So we are exploring agentic AI, multi-agent orchestration. How does it identify and governance scale in that context? Randy, do you want to take that?
Sure, this is the most fundamental, frightening bottom-up problem that we're hearing. It's agent action and multi-agent action. How do you deal with these non-human identities converging and affecting your pipeline? So you need a way to measure them, track them in real time at speed. And you have to understand, who authorized it and who established it. So with a trust layer embedded in your operational structure, it's a natural part of it. You can't go through the gate without checking the authenticity, without verifying the action is created, whether it's an agent, a sub agent, multiple spawn, and each one of them, if they're trying to do some of the same thing, if any one of them is at risk or goes into what we call the forbidden zone or causes a collapse, then you stop it. You do not allow this to proceed. And how can you do this at speed and scale? Well, if you can't compute it, um, that's not checking a rule. This is taking a measurement of drift, the continuity comparison of, well, you were good when we authenticated you. I need to check, did your shape change? And I can do that in sub-second time for all these agents. And even though we're adding this layer, it's a necessary layer. We cannot survive the future without it.
Yeah, that was a perfect answer. And I hope that the answer the it answers the question. And let me take one more before we go on to the closing thoughts. So, is it the universal trust layer applicable only to a high risk AI under the EU AI Act, or it is relevant for all AI systems? Devendra, do you want to pitch in and answer this one?
Sure, Amandeep, thanks. Yes, the answer is yes. The EU AI Act mandates the trust capabilities only for high-risk AI systems, Amandeep. That's what the remit of the act today is. But I would, encourage you and the person who asked the question, as well as everybody, to start thinking about this more architecturally rather than just on a regulatory basis. So AI systems today that we may classify as limited risk may be reclassified tomorrow because new cases reemerge, right? More importantly, the organizational capability, to govern AI, to identify agents, trace any decisions, enforce policies at runtime, is a capability I feel that pays dividends across your entire AI portfolio, not just kind of the regulatory or the regulatory subset that we are trying to identify. So in summary, Amandeep, the enterprise is building the trust layer as enterprise infrastructure rather than just a kind of a compliance project for specific systems will be significantly better positioned, as their AI programs scale. So, my word of caution is don't look at it purely from a regulatory perspective. Use this opportunity to kind of make it, organizationally driven and something that scales your overall business.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Devendra, and I hope it answers the question. So, guys, so everyone, we are at the close of our session, and I want to ask each of the panelists for a final thought. One thing every enterprise in this audience should implement before year end to meaningfully close their AI trust gap. Devendra, let's
Mhm.
start with you.
Sure. And Amandeep, I'm assuming you're just asking me one single thing, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So
Yes.
I would say conduct a trust layer readiness assessment this quarter. Map every AI system in your production environment against the 6 lifecycle governance phases that was spoken of previously, and identify where your evidence chain breaks down. That diagnostic alone, Aman, will prioritize or rather reprioritize your governance roadmap.
Randy, what would be yours?
So this is an interesting point, an inflection point. Sitting involved in organizations, ask the question, what part of your operation or what part of your organization or enterprise or large and small is not being introduced or compared or considered to use AI. And that immediately brings you to the reality that you cannot delay considering and implementing a trust layer approach. It's something that the internet lacked. It's something that the blockchain world lacked. It's something that the whole interbanking, fintech, all the different domains didn't operate on that because we were moving at a speed where we could just make up when we find the mistakes. Can't do that anymore. Decide what if you're thinking about your priority places to put AI, you better think about putting it in a trusted AI. And that means you need the approach to do it technologically. And the thing I want to leave you with is if you embrace this, if we see this shift coming, that opens the doorway that we can now go after all these AI opportunities and ways to infuse it. And we can reduce and eliminate the risk of, if I allow AI and agents to operate here, can I trust them? And you said something earlier that I know Jim would resonate on is, the EU is saying high risk. Well, what might be small or high risk or not high risk can change in a moment. And I don't think there's any system or solution that doesn't deserve this as a fundamental layer.
Perfect. Jim, what would be yours?
And I know we're almost out of time here, so I'll be brief. But I think, one thing is that, we're really at the tip of the iceberg here. If you think about the agentic AI movement and how I mentioned earlier, you might be looking at 10 agents today, and by the end of the year, hundreds, if not thousands, that, everything everyone said in the last few minutes is that, the regulatory requirements are only going to balloon because as more and more agents come online, this becomes a little bit of a runaway train. It's like, where does it start and where does it end? And how is trust really identified anywhere across the enterprise when there's so much agentic AI cross-chain interaction going on? So really, as we said, think outside the regulatory box and think about how I can install, a trust layer that no matter what the regulation requirements is, I have satisfied it, I'm in compliance, and I've protected my organization.
Perfect. So thank you, Jim. Thank you so much, Randy. And thank you, Devendra. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. So the conversation that we had today, it's not academic, The gaps we have described is real, the deadline is real, and the architecture to close it is available now. Do reach out to us. The session recording and the additional links to the QKS research will be your inbox within 24 hours. And keep shooting your questions. We'll reach out to you with the right answers and keep fueling our future agenda for our research. And we'll bring out these sessions with experts to you. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Perfect, guys. I think that was a great one.
Great.
It didn't. I know, Randy, you looked like you had a little bit of an apprehension getting into the session, but you look like a professional. I mean, I can tell you, if somebody were to ask me, I would say this guy has done panels all his life.
Well, I was trying to stay in focus and in line.
Yeah.
And how did the time work out? Because I know we were talking about that. I didn't know. I think it seemed like we were right about an hour,
Yeah.
give or take, because we were talking. I think we were worried about questions or going over, but it seemed fine. And confessing, I'm living this 24/7 for a long time now. And I can't help but feel, that this was a really important and humbling opportunity that you gave us to talk about this. I Jim is my closest confidant, knowing the hours that I'm spending to make sure this is bulletproof. You know, you're not going to find a lot of posts from me or a lot of talks from me out there like this about anything. And so what I'm hoping is that, you know, with Jim leading the way and things like this, that there's going to be quite a stir, you know, that wait a minute, show me, what do you mean compute this, put this in a layer, and that's going to be a monumental moment. We are working with folks that are asking that and confirming it, but it's quite a leap of faith to step out and say this. But I think, Jim, you know, your thoughts, like I said, so I try to check my emotion and my focus because I'm very passionate about what this has become. Never expected it to take on this life, but I guess AI emerged on the scene and accelerated this problem. So I don't know. Thank you guys. I just really appreciate it. And, you know, hopefully the editors will do well and I didn't mumble too much. That's
That
Not
was
at all.
perfect. And Jim was awesome as
Yeah.
he owns the stage. So
Jim,
it
I thought
just
it was you were terrific. It really
Oh,
made
Jim,
it made
yeah.
my job easier too. It's you know,
Yeah,
clear.
and you know his hand gestures and his pauses and his stops were really amazing. Jim, amazing job, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, I have a complete, I have four monitors going right now, and I had, I literally have I have a big 32-inch monitor like right behind the camera, and that had the entire script going down, so I could look right in the camera, and it didn't really, hopefully, it didn't appear like I was reading it. It looked authentic, and so hopefully it gave me the realism that I was hoping for. But thank you guys for the nice comments.
And
yeah.
you
Jim,
know the last call.
Verified said it was you. My dashboard is telling me that, yeah, that's Jim. And well, I guess when you're trying to do things, you only have one chance to make a first impression. So I've got the same thing, Jim. I got the 34-inch monitor here in front of me with the original script underneath, my bullet points on the right, two monitors, one on either side. I'm watching the alerts from the drug company over here because I do have a day job, unfortunately, still, and looking at other stuff here. But this was a wonderful experience. I hope it won't be the last, and really be interesting to see the feedback and the stir. But Jim, I thought you were just like you always are in all our calls, handling it, beautifully. It's another exercise to involve with so many people. As an independent researcher, I'm
Yeah.
kind of in the room quiet, for decades on this particular subject from time to time, and for the last 6 months, 20 hours a day. I got very concerned when ChatGPT hit the scene. I was worried about a moment that it's been a runaway train, and it became clear that a problem that Jim and I worked on 15 years ago for the drug supply chain found applicability here in the digital world even more important. It's not only relegated to the digital world, but I'm happy to say that 350 pages, over 50 tables, and over 100 diagrams and counting is the unified theory that says, here's how you do it.
Yeah.
And that's not a small pill to swallow, but in the spirit of so many other great thinkers that I'm standing on their shoulders, I'm hoping I'm hoping it lands with a sudden realization, and that OMG moment comes soon, because
Sure.
we need it. We do. This is something that I'm not reinventing water, but boy, if you could pick something that's needed now, there's been over $10 billion worth of loss just in the last few years due to fraud, invasion, counterfeit, attack. I mean, they pulled Mythos and Fable off the market for national security. they and I listened to that, if you're aware of it, and I won't go on more than I typically do. You know, Anthropic had to pull their biggest, most important stuff off the market. And what was their answer? Well, we're going to ask for your passport number and your driver's license now. We're going to try to make sure it's you before we let you get an ID and a password.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's okay, but without the trust layer running, that's the doorman checking you, but it's
Yeah.
not saying is it still really you. So they're all everybody's trying to step up to the regulators, all the technology out there. And I think it's coming that we got to say, hey, there's a new tool, there's a new trick out there. Look at it this way, and now you can close that gap. It is very aptly put. So
Yeah.
anyway, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank
I
you.
you know, I'll be excited to see the when this gets out. What's the target for editing and actually broadcasting? Did we have a date for when this was set, like out there?
So I just need to check with the team of editing. Once they have it, we can plan it. So it's just a matter of editing right now. So we'll plan our dates. Let me work that with Arun tomorrow and with the marketing team, so that they can pull a lot of more things around it into the live session, and then we'll decide a date of broadcasting it a good time. So yeah,
Is
I'll
it
just
usually is it weeks type of thing, or how long does it? What's the typical time frame? I'm just
Uh,
curious.
I don't think editing would go beyond next week. Next week would be editing would be done. So it's just a matter of time. I think maybe next to next week we can broadcast it also. So I'll keep you posted on that. It's not just more than 2 weeks. So that would be the
Yeah,
timeline.
so it's a
But
couple. That's what I was looking for. It's usually a couple weeks after you
yeah,
record these that it makes the public, and invites for the webinar are out and things like that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's great.
And I think timing, obviously summer comes with a lot of holidays,
yeah.
vacations, things like that. So, this week is an awful week in the United States.
Yes.
250 years anniversary of 4th of July. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had some of my customers, they closed their second quarter on June 30th, and they made their numbers. And so they're like, everyone gets the week off. And so there is not much going on this week. I believe that'll potentially bleed into next week. So
Yeah.
the week after, I think, when you start to see people back paying attention. I believe that this week and next week are probably kind of hit or miss
Yeah.
weeks for sure. So I think the timing works well.
Jim,
Yeah.
I'm counting on that too, because I've been racing toward a target to finish this paper that I've been sweating over, and I wanted to declare the Declaration of Authenticity around July 4th, but I will not. I cannot do this until it's right, and it's a recursive approach to refining and checking and making sure that all my AI advisors and real advisors say this is good,
Mhm.
and then I'll publish it out there. It'll be the final piece of the trilogy, and at that point, it would take quite an individual or team to take a look at it and see the reality. And I just know that I think within the next week or two, I should be there. Um, I can't. I'm not putting a time on it, because it's like when the review comes back and gives me 20 pages and says you need to fix these things. Not that it's wrong, but if you want to hold up to
Yeah.
scrutiny, do this. It's taking more than I thought, but anyway, so I think the timing's good. So Jim, along with that lines, I haven't been thinking about it. I'm thinking, everybody's going to be worrying about their barbecue around July 4th. Nobody's going to be worrying about the AI trust. That is until you have your AI system making your food, right?
Yeah.
you
I
know,
think that
my
could be
my master
the
built
next.
the master
Yeah.
built grill is deciding, is everything done, or should I put some more charcoal in? And
Yeah.
I don't want my picnic ruined by some AI attack of pulling pulling a fast one. So there's so many images come to mind. But anyway, guys.